Facebook's new Metaverse is relentlessly horrific. On October 28, 2021, Facebook released a video revealing their new name, Meta. In the video, Mark Zuckerberg describes Facebook's new augmented reality, a reality where you can be whatever you want to be, where you can be seen how you want to be seen, where you can escape the clutches of your atomized, transient, lonely life.
Where you're in the experience, not just looking at it. And we call this the Metaverse.
The video was cringy and dystopian, people memed it was a joke, and then we all moved on. Little did we know, we were already in the beta version of Metaverse. In 2021, it was calculated that the average American spends 5 to 6 hours a day on their phone, and another 4 hours on their computer. That means if you sleep 8 hours a day, you spend almost double the amount of your waking hours in the virtual world than you do in the real world. But what about the other 6 hours of your waking day? The hours we somehow manage to spend in the real world, well, that's time that could be spent in the virtual world. That is wasted time that doesn't make Facebook money. It's a completely untapped market, which is why Facebook decided they would take things to the next level, putting all their money, all their employees, and even changing their name to take our addictions to new heights. This really shouldn't be shrugged off. Facebook's algorithms have already worked exceptionally well. Facebook is one of the main forces behind our virtual addiction in the first place. It's for this reason that the Metaverse is beyond sinister, because the Metaverse sets a precedent the likes of which we've never seen before. Instead of us being addicted to a drip of anodyne lethargic dross, we will be attaching our own consciousness, our own lives, our own businesses, our own culture, our society into the virtual world. People are getting married inside the Metaverse. Nike just bought a virtual shoe company that makes virtual NFTs and sneakers for the Metaverse. We are currently witnessing the commodification and mechanization of human existence. But to understand this whole picture, we need to understand the person behind it all, Mark Zuckerberg. The son of a dentist and psychiatrist, Mark Zuckerberg was born and raised in an affluent suburb of New York, where he would go on to attend Harvard University. For Mark's entire life, he has never lived outside of the elitist culture he was birthed into. Just like almost all of his co-workers, associates, the reporters covering him, or even the congressman pretending to regulate him. Starting from the beginning, Zuckerberg's business ventures have always been rife with controversy and unethical business practices. Zuckerberg started his first web venture in 2003 while attending Harvard. The site was called FaceMash. It compiled photos of Harvard students and allowed users to evaluate their attractiveness. But after Harvard caught on to this, Zuckerberg would begin a new site. Inspired by Harvard students' directory Facebooks, Zuckerberg would go on to create his new online version for students. Instantly, the site gained enormous popularity. Facebooks was live on a handful of college campuses. It was not the market-leading social network or even the first college social network. Other companies had launched sooner and with more features. Facebook only had 150,000 users, and yet that summer they raised their first $500,000 in venture capital. And then less than a year later, they raised an additional $12.7 million. So how was Facebook able to raise so much money when its actual usage was so small? Well, by all accounts, what impressed investors the most was one thing in particular: the raw amount of time Facebook's active users spent on the site. More than half of all users came back to the site every single day. Because from the beginning, the site was built to be extremely addictive, so that once the consumer was addicted, Facebook could steal all their information and data and sell it off to advertisers for a hefty profit. From the beginning, Zuckerberg had always shown contempt for his users. For example, just days into Facebook's launch, Zuckerberg texted a friend bragging about how he had all Facebook users' personal information and offered info about anyone at Harvard. "They trust me," Zuckerberg bragged. "Dumb f***s." Whilst at the same time, Zuckerberg assured users over the years that they shouldn't be concerned about their privacy. As Facebook continued to grow, several of Zuckerberg's early collaborators accused him of stealing credit and shares in the company. Lawsuits followed and Zuckerberg paid, but none of this would get in the way of Facebook's growth. The company was now close to 2 billion users worldwide, granting Zuckerberg a net worth of over $70 billion. And as is always the case, Zuckerberg, like every other Silicon Valley titan, never gets high on his own supply. Instead, Zuckerberg values his own privacy. He lives in a secluded 750-acre mega mansion in Hawaii, which is secured by a 6 feet surrounding wall. And in his Palo Alto house, Zuckerberg bought 4 adjacent houses at the price of $30 million just to serve as an extra privacy buffer. And when Zuckerberg does go online, his webcam is covered with masking tape, because Zuckerberg doesn't trust technocrats like himself. But most of the public, or in Zuckerberg's words, the dumb f***s, allow Facebook to gather an ever-growing amount of intimate information about each of its users. Facebook knows the sites you visit, the events you attend, the vehicles you use, because Facebook is attached to so many other sites. It even knows your browsing history even when you're not using Facebook. Facebook is like a leech that's life force depends on sucking all your information and privacy away from you. By synthesizing this information, Facebook's algorithm can make astonishingly accurate assumptions about your life. It can know your assets even if you've never mentioned a word about money, wealth, or your investments. Facebook's facial recognition software is now so advanced that it can detect users and uploaded photos even if the user hasn't been tagged. Because this is the core of Facebook's exponential growth. This is where the real money and wealth behind Facebook lies. Facebook serves as the ultimate hub for advertisements. Its algorithms work to create the most finely tuned ad pictures in history. Facebook's success is predicated on how long it can addict the user, which they can then sell off this engagement to advertisers. And the company has been insanely successful at doing that, with roughly 200 million Americans and Canadians using the app every day. Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, bluntly admitted that Facebook overrides the free will of its users. When engineers designed Facebook, Parker explained that their point of focus was, quote, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious as possible?" In his XEO article, Parker admitted that Facebook wasn't just addictive as a virtual drug, but was having similarly wide-reaching effects. Quote, "Facebook literally changes your relationship with society and with each other. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains." This was a stunning admission, but it received surprisingly little attention at the time, because deep down we all want to ignore this reality. It's just easier to be comfortably numb. The closest analogy I could think of to the addictive power of social media is probably heroin. Heroin gives an illusion of knowing and of control. The heroin addict is analogous to the social media consumer, where what is seen feels real. The virtual world allows the user to blot out the real world and enter into a pleasurable passive numbness. You become absorbed by the dopamine, hooking you to look at the next thing and the next thing. And just like any other addiction, people always overestimate their control over their virtual usage. And most importantly, the damage social media addiction has on the lives of its users and society is what in my view defines it as a serious addiction. And just a few months ago, Frances Haugen revealed Facebook is ripping apart the social fabric of how society works, and science agrees. A 2017 study in the American Journal of Epidemiology found that the use of Facebook correlated with declining psychological and even physical health. The more time spent on Facebook, the worse the user's mental health. And Facebook's other app, Instagram, is even worse. A 2017 study by the British Royal Society for Public Health discovered that Instagram was the most damaging social media site, causing loneliness, anxiety, and depression. This isn't a secret to Zuckerberg, or even the public at this point. It's an established fact. But if you thought Facebook's global omnipresence wasn't creepy enough, things are about to get a whole lot more dystopian. In 2013, Zuckerberg foresaw that Facebook was going to plateau. Almost all big tech companies reach their expiry date as quickly as their rise. MySpace, Napster, Yahoo. So Facebook needed to take on radical change, which is why they began to invest everything into VR technology, putting their finest programmers, engineers, designers to revolutionize social media. It would take over 8 years for their first prototype to be produced, and it was called the Metaverse. Now, what's the Metaverse? Well, according to Zuckerberg, the Metaverse is the next version of the internet. Facebook promises that the Metaverse will introduce the world to a new reality, a reality made up of different worlds, avatars, and businesses. Professor Reed explained that, quote, "The Metaverse's ultimate aim is not just virtual reality or augmented reality, it's mixed reality. It's blending the digital and real world together. Ultimately, this blend may be so good and so pervasive that the virtual and real become indistinguishable. And the market for that is gigantic. Whoever controls it will basically have control of your entire reality." Our minds have already been jacked into the system.
That your phone is already an extension of you. You're already a cyborg. Most people don't realize they are already a cyborg. That phone is an extension of yourself.
But once we live inside the virtual world, where an entire society, economy, and culture exists in this world, that's when we should be deeply concerned. This is potentially the biggest threat to humanity as we know it. But to understand why, let's first look at the experience machine. Philosopher Robert Nozick coined the idea of the experience machine in the 1960s. and his version of the experience machine has uncanny parallels to the metaverse. The experience machine is a thought experiment, where you can put an electrode in your head and you can simulate neurotransmitters that you can live life in infinite bliss. Most rational humans would completely reject this. They wouldn't want this, they'd want a meaningful life. But what if you could put an electrode in your head that gives you endless meaning? Well, I'm starting to worry that that's the situation we find ourselves in now, where the metaverse will provide you meaning through shops, businesses, meeting friends, celebrity worship, instant news, instant pleasure, and shallow meaning in the metaverse. You'll be able to feel as much pleasure as you want and do whatever you want. You can feel like what you're doing is meaningful because that's the illusion needed to keep you stuck in the metaverse algorithm. This is all very real, and as we go into the year 2022, we're already a culture that's being ripped apart by the bliss machine in our pockets, because we're a culture that has lost faith in itself and offers nothing but empty, meaningless nihilism, a neoliberal dystopia that indoctrinates young people to shun authenticity, community, and family in pursuit of vapid consumerism and escapism, where we're so numbed on social media that for us to feel anything, we have to find the most absurd forms of escapism, where everything is so fake and empty inside that we have to live vicariously through other people's stories just to feel anything, where we no longer have a sense of belonging, with our only destiny to be atomized and alone, embroiled in debt, no savings and no money, living in decaying dystopian megacities that are littered with piles of oozing feces. Unable to afford a standard of living that provides us with basic dignity or privacy. A generation of atomized, desperate, lonely losers whose only way of addressing their pain of isolation is to be absorbed by the virtual world. A virtual world that strips us of privacy, freedom, and authenticity. So long as our culture continues to offer nothing whatsoever of substance, authenticity, or meaning, nightmarish trends like the metaverse will only continue to proliferate. And the sad fact is the majority of us will jump in without a second thought, because deep down we have nothing else to live for. And when the majority of people go into the metaverse, that leaves only a small segment of the population who remains outside of the metaverse, who are further ostracized from their friends and family. And of course, Zuckerberg knows this, and he wants this. He's the architect of this, because this allows him to become the prophet, the god of an entirely new reality, the creator looking over his population of dumb an increasingly narrow group of technocrat billionaires who have full control over the lives of the global population. A metaverse of socialism for the rich. This will serve as the catalyst for the greatest transfer of wealth in recorded history, where all our money and assets are artificially owned in a metaverse owned by technocrats, who have full control of the switch, who have full control of the algorithms that show you specially created feeds of dopamine hits that continue to shape how you think, how you feel, how you perceive the world. Algorithms that will control your friends, families, and the stimuli around you, which is a very worrying fact considering Silicon Valley is the biggest threat to the West's freedom of speech. For example, back in 2016, billionaire investor, PayPal co-founder, and Facebook board member Peter Thiel was one of the only Silicon Valley executives who donated to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. Because of his donations, Thiel lost his seat on the board of Facebook on the grounds that supporting Trump was the equivalent of inciting violence. Ellen Powell, the key architect who turned Reddit into the cesspit it is today, explained, quote, "Giving power to someone whose ascension and behavior strikes fear into so many people is unacceptable. Trump's views," Powell wrote, "are more than just political speech fueled by hate and encouraging violence. They make each of us feel unsafe." So if Silicon Valley's billionaire class will publicly shame and cancel their own, what does this mean for the free speech of their consumers? I mean, we've already seen the purging of journalists, commentators, streamers, and even the President of the United States for saying the wrong thing. Just a few years and decades ago, we would never have accepted this excuse that silencing, firing, and cancelling people for their opinions was fine as long as it wasn't the government doing so. But that era has been all too forgotten. So what does this mean for the metaverse, which will have a monopoly on the bulk of information the globe consumes? And most importantly, this poses the question, what kind of society do we want to live in? The metaverse will grant the control of a new reality to a man who's already tearing up the fabric of society, sowing the seeds of distrust and hate across the world. And now he's the man who will dictate what you see and feel.
But it is going to bother you because you're human, and I was human. I am human, still.
Our society has been descending into madness at such an accelerating rate that the metaverse is promoted as our only redemption. Promoted by Silicon Valley technocrats, the World Economic Forum, and our current plutocracy. Because not only does the metaverse give them more money, more wealth, more investments, but it also gives them unrivaled power. We're already seeing countries like China using dystopian social monitoring technology to control their population, where China is combining their health program and their social credit system to create a civilization code. A civilization code that gives people a civilization score that ranks them. A rank that the CCP uses to judge who gets to enjoy the benefits the state provides and who gets restricted and punished.
已经被限制这个自由的出行了，就是订票啊，我们高铁和飞机都不行。我跟你演示一下，我们用这个 APP 来订票。现在是我们从重庆到西安，我们来订一张票，订一张过几天的票。
And what does it say?
然后就显示那个出票失败，说我已经被法院依法限制高消费，限制乘坐 G 字头列车。
All of this data is then stored on a government database that tracks your internet activity, internet history, which sites you spend your time on, what you say, what you do, and your overall general behavior. With some of these very same restrictions now being imposed on massive chunks of the Western population. A digital ID card that is monitored by government databases around the world, where your basic liberties are stripped away from you if you aren't able to comply, where you are dehumanized for not wanting your God-given freedoms to be used as a bargaining tool.
And I think, like others have said, gyms, hairdressers, but why not supermarkets? Why not public transport? I know it's difficult to police some of these things, but really, if you want to participate in society, you need to be vaccinated.
Where all of those who oppose this are targeted by big tech giants and the parasitic mob. All of these combining factors makes the metaverse the gateway drug to a globalized social credit system, where your speech, actions, and preferences are monitored at all times of the day, where your virtual memories are chopped up and distributed to advertisers for a profit. If this doesn't terrify you, I don't know what will. The companies who will do this have done nothing to engender trust in their users, and yet they will be the architects of our new reality. And the even sadder fact is that most of the public will continue to eat all of this up, desperately rushing to fill the void of emptiness and loneliness, voraciously consuming synthetic emotions through any escapism possible, complicitly creating a nightmarish future that will destroy all the pillars of Western free society, where we will eagerly strip all of our privacy and dignity for a pair of Nike's NFT virtual shoes, gleefully becoming married inside a universe run by a man who sees his customers as dumb f***s, while at the same time, China is now putting their efforts to unplugging their population from the virtual world. China is limiting video game usage. China is limiting their population's internet usage. Instead, China is promoting marriage within its population through social economical wedding zones. China is doing everything it can to promote family culture within its populace, and rewarding happy families for doing so. A stark contrast to the West, where single parenthood is now praised as a virtue, where marriage and happy families are seen as an oppressive force, where the metaverse is praised by the elites, where the metaverse is willingly eaten up by people so desperate to escape their own hellish reality, a reality that is no longer even real in itself, where everything we eat, everything we consume, all the facades, all the dystopian megacities, all the synthetic pills, reality, we haven't even lived in anything remotely real in years. And that's why only in a society like ours, where nothing is real, does virtual escapism seem like a utopia. Only in a sick society does a man like Mark Zuckerberg become a sanctified prophet, which is why the technocratic vultures are busy licking their lips.